Final bill for consideration today is House File 1269. It's from Representative Pryor. And remember, it's our intention to lay this bill over by 4:30 p.m. Representative Pryor, would you like to motion House File 1269 before the committee to lay over for further consideration?
So moved, Mr. Vice Chair.
Wonderful. Now that the bill is before us, Rep. Pryor, please state your name for the record and give us an introduction of the bill.
Thank you. I am Representative Lori Pryor. This is my bill that I am the chief author, that we are introducing what is known as the Governor's Policy Bill. We are honored to have with us our representatives from the Department of Education that will actually do the presentation of the bill. Something I can tell the audience members is that we are introducing the bill right now, but this is just to get the information out, and there'll be further consideration of many of the policies that are brought forward today in further meetings. And so that, for people new to this process, is what we mean by being laid over. It's still in this committee, something that we're still considering, and we'll be working with all the way up until the end of our committee work this time. So thank you, Vice Chair, for allowing me my opening remarks, and I will turn it over to my testifiers.
Thank you, Rep. Pryor. And MD, we welcome you to the committee. And as each of you in turn get to your part of the presentation, please state your name for the record as we move forward. Glad you're here.
Mr. Chair, committee members, my name is Ado Shuni. I'm the Director of Government Relations for the Minnesota Department of Education, and thank you for the opportunity to present on the Governor and Lieutenant Governor's 2023 Education Policy Bill. And thank you to Chair Pryor for carrying this package. This policy bill is predicated on the Due North Education Plan and seeks to work toward the goal that every child receives a high-quality education, no matter their race or zip code. Focuses on centering our students and all that we do, and builds Minnesota's world-class education through a safe and welcoming environment with caring and qualified educators so that students are seen as unique individuals, valued and heard as they come into our school buildings every day. We hear about embedding more inclusiveness and rigor into our academic standards to ensure all students receive a high-quality education. Through our American Indian Education Package, we are looking to create a more supportive teaching and learning environment that not only enhances our American Indian students' learning, but supports families. All students will deserve to have the best chance to succeed in school, and that means having innovative and non-exclusionary approaches to keeping them there when they may face behavioral challenges. Our students in schools thrive when we have well-supported and valued educators who are qualified. And those are just some of the major themes that you're going to hear about from us today as we talk through some of the major policy components in this bill. And joining me today, I have my government relations colleagues Shana Morse and Megan Ariola. And with that, I'm going to start with the substantive portion of the presentation. We'll start with the presentation on academic standards. Policy bill first makes a number of changes in this space. First, we'd like to embed the contributions and history of American Indians and tribal nations into our academic standards. It's critical that all students are taught about the topic, and we've heard in this committee when discussing Indigenous Peoples Day how much we as a society need to improve here with our knowledge base. You will hear more about Indigenous education for all later on in the presentation from my colleagues. We're also seeking to embed ethnic studies into our academic standards, much in the same manner. This will ensure that all our students have the opportunity to learn about the contributions and histories of the diverse people we have in our state and country. We're seeking to make it absolutely clear in statute that when standards come up for review and revision, that MDE has the authority to engage in rulemaking without seeking new authority in legislation. For mathematics and science, the majority of the confusion relates to traditional course names provided in statute rather than satisfying the Minnesota academic standards. So we're looking to make some language adjustments there to make it clear and to align with the standards revision that we've engaged in over the past few years. As you heard earlier this week, or last week, we are seeking to delay the review and revision of the physical education standards to allow more time for educators to implement the current standards to avoid confusion through the field on whether the current standards are needed to be implemented. On the next slide, the proposal related to agricultural programming at schools serves to clarify that agriculture includes food and natural resource pathways, as well as within the licensure cluster, that MDE approves programs, not departments, and to correct an error in statute that points to an incorrect subpart of the rule. We are adding arts to this list of required statewide standards rather than the locally developed ones. We're clarifying that, and then adding media arts to statute as an arts credit option. Currently, there's a single line in Minnesota statute which directs each school district to establish its own standards in career and technical education. This language provides little guidance about the rigor or alignment of those standards. Additionally, this language is silent on how frequently the standards should be reviewed and updated. So this proposal will provide clarity to local school districts by listing their resources school districts should reference while establishing their own standards in career and technical education. And finally, for my section, we're recommending that we reduce unnecessary student testing by eliminating questions, by eliminating off-grade questions on the Minnesota Comprehensive Assessments. Those are not used for any purpose at this point, so we seek to eliminate those. And with those, I'll pass it off to my colleague, Shannon Morris. Oh, pardon me. My apologies. Pardon me. My apologies. I'm supposed to be leading this bunch too. On the next slide, we have some adjustments that we're making for the Online Learning Act. We came with the proposal last year, and instead, you're going to see a lot of language change on the bill proposal. This is a repeal and replace. The current statute is written in, we believe, in a confusing manner. So not only are we going to make some policy adjustments, we're also just going to make the whole statute clearer. So we're providing definitions. We are moving to, rather than an approval process for online, being an online rather than an approved online learning entity, districts and charters will be able to provide online instruction as a learning or teaching and learning modality, and we are shifting to a continuous improvement model. We will retain approval for districts and charters that are providing supplemental online courses. So those are courses that are provided to students that are not enrolled in their districts, whether they be resident districts or open enrolled students. So there will be still be a component that requires approval from the department. And then we are we are making some changes verifying that school districts responsible for education programs in day and residential care and treatment facilities may utilize the state approved online learning programs in home school districts and charter schools, home school districts and charter schools in fulfilling their responsibilities for education programs and services in those facilities. And now, with that, I will conclude my portion and pass it off to my colleague, Shana Morris.
Thanks. For the record, Shana Morris, Assistant Director of Government Relations at MDE. And I'm going to pick up here on slide 6. So this bill includes a robust package of policy changes intended to support American Indian students, recognize their unique identities and needs in the space of education, and enhance clarity on existing provisions related to American Indian education, aid, and programming. Starting out on this slide with a change related to sacred tobacco. American Indians have used traditional tobacco for centuries for ceremonial, religious, and healing purposes. This bill adds permission for American Indian students to carry a medicine pouch containing loose tobacco as part of traditional spiritual and cultural practices. The bill language also makes it clear that American Indian students may wear items of cultural and religious significance at graduation ceremonies. An item such as an eagle feather is a sign of academic success, and so we wanted to make that clear in this language as well. Last on this slide is a proposed change to how we handle mascots at schools in Minnesota. Not all mascots honor American Indian people, all mascots modeled that way. The characters and stereotypes of American Indian mascots can be harmful and perpetuate negative stereotypes. And so this bill would prohibit a public school district or charter from adopting a name, symbol, or image of an American Indian tribe, custom, or tradition as a mascot, nickname, logo, letterhead, or team name. A process is provided here so that an exemption to the prohibition can be sought if a community feels that the mascot's not derogatory or harmful. That process would engage the 11 tribal nations and the Tribal Nations Education Committee, or TNEC. On slide 7, the bill adds provisions around the development and implementation of Indigenous education for all, which Mr. Uni mentioned earlier. Specifically, it strengthens and clarifies language on what's embedded into the academic standards related to Indigenous education and how feedback's received. The bill also provides definition of what an Indigenous education for all program should look like and accomplish, including a report to the legislature on a needs assessment to inform the development of future resources. The bill would also add TNEC and Minnesota's tribal nations to the list of representatives the commissioner is required to consult with during the academic standards process. This is already occurring, but making it formal ensures consistency going forward. Last on this slide is requiring that a district or school that receives American Indian education aid and serves more than 100 state-identified American Indian students provides those American Indian culture and language classes, presumably with a portion of that funding. On slide 8, districts in the state with 100 or more state-identified American Indian students would be, are required, under section 124D.76 to have a community coordinator. This language seeks to ensure that full or part-time positions are dedicated to American Indian education programming versus being an add-on or an additional duty of another employee with other main job duties. Next, there are some cleanup changes to clarify that the state-identified definition of American Indian student is used for education purposes. This ensures that American Indian education students who identify as more than one race are properly identified as American Indian, which the federal count and definition does not adequately do. And then last on this slide are some minor changes to the role of the American Indian Education Director at MDE. Moving to slide 9, first on this slide are changes to improve the American Indian Parent Advisory Committees in terms of how they function and who participates. Districts or schools receiving American Indian education aid are required to have parent advisory committees to guide the district decisions on how to invest those funds and support American Indian students. Changes in this bill would make sure that the members of those committees are actually parents or guardians of American Indian children. Clarify that we're using the state definition for purposes of determining when a committee must exist, and providing a process for committees to review program offerings that are extended to American Indian students. And last, the bill would make it clear that educational data may be disclosed to tribal nations regarding tribally enrolled or descendant students. Next, moving on to discipline, the bill includes a holistic set of recommendations that are interconnected but accomplish different goals related to discipline in schools. The reasons for advancing policy promoting alternatives to exclusionary discipline are many. To this end, the bill, perhaps most notably in this area, seeks to minimize the use of suspensions for kindergarten through grade 3 children. The policy solution here acknowledges the developmental stages of children and its premise on the belief that students should not be punished for behaving in line with their current cognitive and emotional capacity. We also know that the practice of suspending our youngest learners is a major contributor to discipline disparities. During the 2018-19 school year, Black students received 44.8% of all K-5 suspensions, while making up only 11.6% of the student population. The change would still recognize that there may be times when a removal is necessary. The expectation would be that all non-exclusionary measures are exhausted and there's an ongoing safety threat before a child is disciplined using those exclusionary practices. Other changes in this package include creating a clear definition for the term non-exclusionary discipline and requiring the use of those practices within reason, ensuring students have access to make-up work and alternative education services, prohibiting the use of suspensions to address attendancy and truancy concerns, requiring school boards to adopt a policy, to adopt a complaint process, as part of their school discipline policy, and then creating a clear definition and reporting standards for pupil withdrawal agreements. And I'll just acknowledge proactively right here, we understand there are some concerns and are committed to continuing the conversation on how those are tracked and reported. And then finally, my section will conclude on slide 11 here with a handful of provisions related to early childhood. Related to enrollment, this would clarify, the bill language rather would clarify districts could provide priority open enrollment into kindergarten for students who are currently enrolled in a voluntary pre-kindergarten or school readiness plus program, but not requiring it, and allow families to choose that their child may receive early childhood special education services in a non-resident district if the child attends a Head Start or licensed child care program in the district. Absent this permission, or option for families rather, many children that would benefit from those ECSE services might not otherwise receive them. There are 3 changes in the bill related to early learning scholarships of note, making a child in need of child protective services automatically eligible for a scholarship. making sure that we're not adding undue paperwork at that difficult time in the family's life, adding children of incarcerated parents or children receiving child protective services to priority eligibility for scholarships, changing the timeline to select a program from 10 to 3 months in order to promote more access for the children to receiving high-quality learning experiences, and reducing unused scholarship awards. And then finally, the bill would make a practice that was utilized during the pandemic permanent by making a virtual early childhood screening option when health concerns exist allowable. We know that early intervention is key, and screening is key to identifying those early intervention needs. Do a technology handoff.
Yep, thank you. We're going to do a little computer shuffle here. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. My name is Megan Ariola. I'm the legislative coordinator at MDE. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm going to be walking us through the final slides here. So as we testified to last week, I believe, we do align with the Coalition to Increase Teachers of Color and American Indian Teachers on their goal of setting a statewide goal to increase said teachers by 2% each year by 2040. As part of MDE's public engagement process, we hear time and time again from our communities that students need educators who reflect the diversity of our state in order to thrive in their educational experience. Providing students with a variety of life experience, personal connection, learning styles, geographic origins, and cultural diversity at the head of their class helps them develop their own best learning styles, and it also supports the development of their aspirations and future goals. We also carry language similar to the Coalition regarding modifications to the World's Best Workforce and Achievement and Integration Strategic Plans. The provisions that we are adding here reflect, again, what we've heard from our communities, that districts and schools need to look at cultural responsiveness and equity, not as an afterthought, but as a conscious conversation during the formations of these plans. In the same vein, by requiring assessments of both teacher and principal progress toward cultural responsiveness as part of their regular evaluations, affirms that belief that these are important aspects of the school experience, not only for students, but for other teachers and school staff as well. We also carry a provision in the Coalition's bill that requires a written policy prohibiting discrimination and retaliation towards teachers for incorporating into their curriculum contributions by persons in a protected class. As we mentioned, as more and more teachers are feeling vulnerable and feeling stressed about teaching a well-rounded and accurate account of their subject area for fear of disciplinary actions, this provision would provide statutory protections for teachers to just do their jobs. We have had a lot of conversations in education committees over the past few years about this pathway to Tier 3. MDE is proposing to remedy some concerns raised by teachers and education partners who are concerned about this loophole, but also not penalizing teachers who are exploring this option as a way to get from a Tier 2 license to a Tier 3. So our language does include a grandfather clause that would allow licenses that have been issued on June 30th, 2023 or prior, that they would be able to continue to use their years of experience to progress toward a Tier 3 license. We are also looking to eliminate a statutory requirement that all Tier 3 and Tier 4 relicense applicants complete a basic skills test. MDE really does see this as a way to retain our teachers by removing a barrier to relicensure that we have heard has dissuaded candidates from relicensing in the past. By the time a teacher receives a Tier 3 or Tier 4 license, they have already proven through testing, education, demonstration, and the initial licensing process and portfolio work that they have the necessary basic skills required to teach at their level. Making them take a test for something for which they have already proven their proficiency just doesn't make sense. We are also looking to remove prohibitions on joining collective bargaining units and receiving continuing contract rights for certain teachers. Minnesota's always been a state with labor at the top of conversation every year. By allowing some teachers to join unions, if they so choose, their collective local bargaining unit and, by allowing some teachers to join these units and receive these rights, but barring others from doing the same, leaves these teachers feeling less than or inferior to their colleagues. We all know that this is not the case, so removing this prohibition allows these teachers equal access to these unions if they so choose. We are going to jump to charter schools next. Last year, we heard a lot in education committees about unexpected and unannounced closure of charter schools and how that impacted families, students, and communities who relied upon them. There was tones of feeling like they were scrambling to get their kids to school, but more than anything, the question was, how did this happen? Minnesota charter schools are public schools, and as such, MDE wants them to succeed and serve the populations that they want to serve. By requiring a market need and demand study as part of the application process for new charter schools and new charter authorizers, which is already a common practice in many fields, including business, we can ensure that those newly opened charter schools are thriving, successful, and staying around. In the same vein, Minnesota charter schools are public schools, and therefore they are free to Minnesota students, and Minnesota students should receive priority for enrollment. Next slide. There's been some confusion in statute regarding when the term of a charter authorizer ends. And just adding language to clear that up in statute makes it clear that charter authorizers are still active and responsible for their schools until they withdraw or until the commissioner terminates that. Oh, there were a couple more, sorry. These two items regarding leasing space from the owner instead of subleasing and prohibiting an affiliated building corporation from supporting more than one charter schools goes to the aforementioned goal of ensuring that charter schools are thriving, successful, and are staying around for as long as their students and families need them. This makes sure that the attention that charter schools need and deserve is given to them. Finally, we have some modifications around our administration of the federal food service programs, including requiring, I'm not clicking right. Requiring child and adult care food program and summer food service program applicants to provide financial eligibility documentation as part of their application to MDE, putting a limit on how often legally distinct CACFP and SFSP sites can transfer sponsoring organizations to just once per year. There are some exceptions in there. Requiring a non-governmental organization to provide documentation to MDE verifying that their staff have completed training specific to these programs before their application is approved. Much of our nutrition staff's time during the pandemic was spent just fielding calls from the field, asking questions that we know are covered in trainings. So just by making this requirement, these trainings are free and available to them. And by making that requirement just ensures that our staff are spending their time focusing on their work at hand. Finally, prohibiting new SFSP sites from opening within a half a mile of an existing site unless the new program would not serve the same group of students, not serve the same meal type, or if there is a geographical barrier such as a highway or a busy road that would prevent students from being able to access the existing site. So that is all I'm gonna marathon through at the moment. We at this time are finished with our walkthrough.
Wonderful. Well, we thank you from MDE, Ms. Morse, Ms. Ariola, Ms. Rooney, for providing that overview. We're going to move on now to public testimony. And before we begin, I want to remind testifiers that we are hoping to move forward with our business and lay this bill over by 4:30. So we're going to ask that your testimony adhere to 2 minutes or less. And I will jump in to let you know if you are moving past that 2 minute mark. And so please accept my apology in advance if it comes to that. Just a note to the public, if you do want to submit written testimony, we will still accept that and get it distributed to members of the committee should you want to have your voices heard as well. Our first testifier is Matt Shaver, who's public policy for Ed Allies. We're going to welcome Mr. Shaver to the committee. And up next we have John Olson, who's going to be providing testimony second, followed by Ms. Dana Smith.
All right.
Please, Mr. Shaver.
All right. Chair Hill, members of the committee, good afternoon. My name is Matt Shaver. I'm a teacher and I'm the policy director at Ed Allies, which is a statewide education advocacy nonprofit. I'm here to provide our thoughts on Governor Walz's education policy bill. We see a number of policy provisions that would improve the experience of students in schools and improve the relevance and rigor of instruction. We support a clarification to the lunch shaming definition on lines 21.12 through 21.13 that makes clear what was already obvious. Alternative meals for students are inherently demeaning, and the practice must go. We also support the updated definition for how students qualify for limited or interrupted formal schooling on lines 33.15 through 33.27. This is a significantly more inclusive definition that will simplify the identification process and ensure that students won't miss out on needed supports due to technicalities. Policy contained in Article 3 on American Indian education would move our state closer toward honoring Indigenous communities by eliminating racist mascots and allowing for tribal regalia at graduation ceremonies, while also centering Indigenous voices and decisions on core academic standards. We also see Governor Walz leading boldly on improving school discipline practices and outcomes in Article 5. Ed Allies is a proud partner of the Solutions Not Suspensions Coalition and are thrilled to see limits on overused and inequitable push-out practices for our youngest learners, coupled with clear definitions of non-exclusionary discipline, which will foster an environment where students are welcomed, supported, and able to learn because they will be in school. Finally, we're disappointed to see the proposed changes to tiered licensure in lines 83.12 through 83.15 that would eliminate the Tier 2 to Tier 3 experience pathway. This pathway isn't a loophole, it's a promise. And this proposal breaks that promise to Minnesota educators who signed up to teach in a pandemic, that if they met the statutory qualifications for a Tier 2 license and taught effectively for 3 years, they would earn their Tier 3 license. This proposal could close the door in the faces of around 1,000 Minnesota educators. And in a state where 6% of teachers are teachers of color, it is notable that 25% of all Tier 2 teachers are teachers of color. This proposal would also send a clear message to the 99 educators who have already earned their Tier 3 license using this pathway that no one else should ever be allowed to make teaching a career the way they did. These are educators showing up every day for kids, and they belong. Given the teacher shortages and lack of diversity in our teacher workforce, this proposal would be counterproductive to efforts to eliminate shortages and increase teacher diversity. We should not be taking away opportunities for people from diverse and non-traditional backgrounds to make teaching a career. We thank the Governor and Chair Pryor for their leadership and look forward to working with both to ensure a final policy bill does right by students and educators. Thank you for your time today. Thank you, members of the committee, for your public service to our state.
Thank you, Mr. Shaver. John, with apologies, we're going to move first to Ms. Lori Harper, who's the Education Director at Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe. John, you'll follow right after her. If you'd like to take a seat up front, we'll move to you next. Following John's testimony, we will hear from Dana Smith.
Miigwech for allowing me to provide this testimony. There was a miscommunication. Our tribal chairman was supposed to be here today to provide the comments, so these comments were written for him. I'll do my best to imitate, just kidding. Miigwech. It was a long drive. I'm Lori Harper. I'm the Director of Education for Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe. And real quickly, I know you're limited for time. Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe supports the tribal data sharing. Tribal educational agencies and departments should have equitable access to American Indian student data that is at least on par with the local educational agencies. Equitable access to our student data allows us to inform our services and programming and allows for better partnerships with the state and the LEAs on addressing myriad of challenges our students face: attendance issues, disciplinary disparities, and low graduation rates. Of course, Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe supports tribal regalia at graduation ceremonies. American Indian students should be allowed to wear tribal regalia or objects of cultural significance at graduation. An example of cultural significance is the eagle feather or plume, as it is the highest honor that an American Indian can receive. It is often bestowed upon our graduates of high school and college students as they have succeeded in a setting meant to eliminate us. We are not so far removed from the boarding school era, and our children have honored not just themselves and their families, but our tribal nations through their achievements. On the academic standards, Section 2 of Minnesota Statutes 2022, Section 120B.021, Subdivision 2, is amended to read, Subdivision 2, you have it in front of you in there. On the standards development, the commissioner must consider advice from at least the following stakeholders in developing statewide rigorous core academic standards in language arts, mathematics, science, social studies, including history, geography, economics, government, and citizenship, and the arts. And as the Tribal Education Director for Leech Lake, that represents the Tribal Nations Education Committee for Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe, as well as the voice of Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe today, we would appreciate the amendment to include number 6, representatives from the Tribal Nations Education Committee, period. Indigenous Education for All, of course, Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe supports this, and the state must provide the expectations and requirements for the development and implementation of Indigenous Education for All without the statutory requirements provided by the state in partnership with the Tribal Nations Education Committee. The LEAs will simply ignore the Indigenous Education for All curriculum. We know that because we've developed curriculum back in 1974, and I have copies of it. State count of American Indian students. Minnesota Department of Education must use the state count of American Indian students in all of their departments. The federal definition limits the count to only those students that are tribally enrolled. They eliminate us to other, we become othered at the federal level. In our family, if you're born into this family, you are recognized as an Anishinaabe or an Indian person. The blood quantum and identification was not of our design and was actually created to cull us. So, miigwech, those are the words of Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe.
And if you could please move to conclusion. Thank you.
Yeah, that's my conclusion.
Oh, wonderful.
Miigwech, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Harper. We appreciate it. Up next, we have John Olson, followed by Dana Smith. And following Ms. Smith, we'll hear from Caitlin Snyder.
Good afternoon, Chairman and members of the committee. I'm John Olson. I'm a board member of the Minnesota Science Teachers Association. About a year ago, I retired from MDE, where I was a science specialist. I oppose the proposed changes in graduation requirements for science that are in lines 5.25 to 5.30. The current graduation requirements have 3 parts: credits, courses, and standards. 3 credits of science, including 1 credit of biology, 1 credit of chemistry or physics, and 1 elective credit, which is a little bit nebulous. Within those courses, students must satisfy all the standards in earth and space science, life science, and either chemistry or physics. The proposed changes would remove the specific course requirements. This change would weaken the graduation requirements and leave ambiguity about what courses schools should offer. It would provide inequities in science education for all our students. In addition, the language is inaccurate. There are no biology standards, and the 2019 standards do not have high school physical science standards. Instead, the Minnesota Science Teachers Association recommends that the graduation requirements be revised to specify 1 credit of biology, 1 credit of chemistry or physics, and 1 credit of earth and space science instead of the elective credit language. This would be consistent with the science standards, which are organized in that fashion. Minnesota has a well-connected system of science standards, courses, and teacher licenses that assures that students experience high-quality instruction and well-planned curriculum from teachers who have content knowledge specific to the courses. Minnesota has experienced high achievements in national and international science tests. An analysis done from SciMathMin, a collaboration of schools, businesses, government, and higher ed, noted that strong standards, similarities of curriculum, and rigorous licensure requirements played a significant role in these accomplishments. The proposed science graduation revision would erode that strong, coherent system. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Olson. We'll move on next to Dana Smith, who will join us remotely. And following Ms. Smith's remarks, we'll hear from Caitlin Snyder and then Natalie Kisper.
Hello, can you hear me all right?
We can. Please proceed.
Chairperson Pryor and Education Policy Committee members, my name is Dana Smith from Bemidji, and I come to you as a veteran science teacher, a member of the Minnesota Science Teachers Association, and as someone who is deeply concerned about the consequences of some of the proposed language in HF 1269. Minnesota has long been a leader in education. This commitment to our students is affirmed in our call for rigorous academic standards, statewide accountability, and graduation requirements that are specific and meant to prepare all Minnesota students for college and career readiness. I worked on the 2019 Science Standards Revision Committee. We created consistency and alignment with the current statute requiring 3 credits of science by writing standards and benchmarks for the physical sciences, chemistry or physics, life science, and earth and space science. This allows for equitable consistency in content focus and licensure. In fact, MNSTA is advocating for 120B.024 subdivision 1 graduation requirement section 3 to read 3 credits of science, including 1 credit of biology, 1 credit of chemistry or physics, and 1 credit of earth science. This would further align the standards with graduation requirements. We know this is needed because in a recent MNSTA survey, only 24.7% of schools that responded offer a required course in earth science, and less than 40% offer elective courses that address only some of the earth and space science standards. It is long past time earth science is recognized and elevated to the importance that the other sciences are afforded, and that our industry partners, economy, and workforce continue to call for. The proposed change in graduation requirements outlined in HF 1269 will effectively remove these assurances and create even more ambiguity and inconsistencies in an already confusing interpretation that will lead to inequitable access for our students. Science is unique and requires an approved preparatory program. Licensure and courses taught to be in alignment is best way to serve our students. The proposed language in HF 1269 would allow for standards to be placed in any course, remove alignment with licensure and teacher preparation programs, and remove any statutory oversight of the content that students have access to in their districts. Minnesota students deserve our very best in terms of equitable access, teacher preparation and content expertise, consistency, and best practices. This proposed legislation will not create clarity, but will degrade the rigor and access that all Minnesota students deserve. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. We'll go next to Ms. Snyder and follow her with Ms. Casper.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, my name is Caitlin Snyder. I'm a lobbyist with Education Minnesota, representing 86,000 educators across the state. I would like to thank Chair Pryor and Governor Walz for bringing forward a bill that strengthens supports for our students and for our educator workforce. I will echo the supportive comments from Ms. Harper relating to embedding American Indian supports across all levels of our education, including the Indigenous education, which all of our students need access to, and the data pieces. We are also appreciative of the inclusion of ethnic studies and the language relating to discriminatory behavior in the lunch program. Relating to workforce concerns for our members, as everyone knows, there's a teacher shortage, there's a paraprofessional shortage, and there are pieces in this bill that will help address that. Including language that prevents any discipline against a teacher who touches on subjects related to federal protected classes will ensure that there isn't some of the lashback we've been seeing in other states across the country. Allowing our Tier 1 teachers to be able to organize means that these teachers who might be the most vulnerable in terms of workload or other expectations have protections is very important. Ensuring our principals have culturally responsive training and that our ECFE, ABE teachers have due process protections will make sure that our workplaces are more protective of our educators. I will add that the language referred to as the loophole, you'll hear a lot about this tomorrow. I can save some of my comments for then. But making sure that teachers have training in content and the science of teaching. There is 60 years of research to back up that this is the way to keep educators in the classroom. So this is both a support for educators and a support for our students as they help to build longer lasting relationships in the classroom. Finally, there are some areas we were hoping to see improved. I would echo the comments from Mr. Olson and Ms. Smith. This isn't a clarification of our science standards. This is abdicating the state's responsibility for having a level playing field for school districts. This will create more inequities as school districts that can afford teachers in biology biology, chemistry, and physics pursue that, and school districts that cannot afford it will be left behind, as will their students. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ms. Snyder. Next, we'll hear from Natalie Casper, followed by Heather Douglas, and we'll close with Karen Miller.
Hi, my name is Natalie Casper. I am a parent, a school board member, and a homeschool tutor. I reside in Dakota County. I'm here today to discuss the House Bill HF 1269. Due to the extensiveness of the bill, I will focus specifically on lines 26.28 through 26.34, and lines 77.24 through 79.18, and lines 92.5 through 94.5. I oppose the additions of these lines. These sections all outline what a school board and district must include in their strategic planning and world's best workforce goals. Our school district's goals is to have a rigorous, disciplined, and engaging environment where students can thrive in reading, writing, math, and science. According to the state of Minnesota's report card from 2022, out of all the students in the state, only 44.8% are meeting the state standards in math, 51.1% in reading, and 41.3% in science. Less than half of all students are meeting state standards. It should be the school districts that determine their goals with the input of their community. By adding non-academic requirements of ethnic studies to district goals, an undue burden is placed on schools, hindering the need teachers have to focus on the excellence of reading, writing, math, and science. According to the definition of ethnic studies in Section 1, Article 2, it would require students to learn the framework of cultural Marxism, teaching students to focus on power groups, to separate themselves, and view each other through the lens of oppressed or oppressor. It should not be the goal of the state or school district to require people to validate, affirm, and embrace ideologies that may go against their personal convictions, religion, or an idea that seeks to control the thoughts, actions, and emotions of the citizens in which it's supposed to be serving. This breaks the First Amendment rights that protects individual citizens of America from government-mandated belief systems. Due to these reasons and the content outlined in ethnic studies, I ask that you consider removing them, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. We'll move next to Heather Douglas, please. Ms. Douglas, when you're ready.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for allowing me to speak here today. My name is Heather Douglas, and I'm an elected school board director for the 5th largest school district in the state of Minnesota. I also serve as a school board member for an intermediate school district that services 11 school districts in the metro area. I'm also a homeschooling parent of 4 children, some of whom receive concurrent education through our local school district in the field of special education. And today I speak in opposition to HF 1269, addressing the language in reference to homeschool test reporting. In Minnesota, the management, collection, and response to letters of intent to homeschool is the responsibility of the superintendent alone. Superintendents already have a significant responsibility to manage a multitude of legislative mandates. Few have a staff person that is dedicated to homeschool data collection and support. MSBA, MASA, AMSD, MASBO, Edmond, Osseo area schools, and dozens of school districts and educational organizations across the state have included as part of the legislative platform that no additional unfunded mandates be included as part of their legislative platforms. They do not want to follow mandates that have not been fully funded. They also have addressed their significant concerns surrounding the critical staffing shortages throughout education. We cannot continue to require insurmountable data collection and paperwork without a clearly defined purpose for that data. Who will collect this data and how will it be used? Homeschool educators are required to test yearly using one of 24 approved nationally normed achievement tests. In order to opt out of testing for their student, they have one pathway to do so. They must apply for accreditation, they must pay the fees to be accredited, and have their full scope and sequence of their lessons plans be approved by HEBA, the only approved home education accreditation program in Minnesota. This significantly impacts families that cannot afford these fees, whose children need alternative testing methods. However, public school students are able to opt out of standardized testing with a simple request from their parent or guardian. Additionally, I believe it's important to address the difference in testing for homeschool students and public school students. Homeschool students must take a nationally normed test. Here in Minnesota, our students take the Minnesota Comprehensive Assessment, which is not a nationally normed test. The data collected from homeschool testing will not be comparable to the MCA data that's received from our students, and many school districts, including Osseo area schools, have already expressed their need for a more instructionally relevant exam, as the MCAs do not always provide for accurate representation of student achievement. Testing is one fraction of a student's achievement and their success. As an educator, a Hispanic woman, a Native American woman, and a mother, it is my belief that we all want our children to thrive in their educational environments. We desire equitable access to education and for each of our students to be seen as an individual and not a test score. Please consider eliminating this language from the bill. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you, Ms. Douglas. And our final speaker, please refrain from applauding. Our final speaker here is Ms. Karen Miller. Is it Karen or Karen? I'm sorry.
It's Karen.
Excuse
I
me.
respond to both.
Pardon me,
Thank you.
Karen.
Well, members of the committee, Madam Chair and Mr. Vice Chair, it truly is an honor to speak before you today. My name is Karen Miller. I'm an English teacher, a home educator of 19 years to our 6 children, and a dyslexia advocate from Dakota County. Homeschoolers excel. 78% of peer-reviewed studies on academic achievement demonstrate that homeschoolers perform statistically better than those in traditional schools. Homeschool students also typically score 15 to 30% higher than public school students on standardized exams. Therefore, there's no justification in HF 1269 lines 3.7 to 3.9, which requires homeschoolers to submit their students' annual test scores to the superintendent. Furthermore, even parents of school-aged children have the right to opt their children out of testing. It is discrimination against homeschoolers to A, not allow us to also opt our children out of testing, and B, furthermore, to ask us to report our scores. As homeschoolers, our greatest concern is what will the district do with our students' scores? We're very concerned this might lead to further restriction or discrimination against homeschoolers. Now, you might be concerned, what about struggling learners? Well, a Minnesota statute already requires homeschoolers to pursue additional testing if their students score in the lowest 30th percentile. Trust me, as an educator of a severely dyslexic learner, I have lived and witnessed firsthand the dedication of homeschool parents to persist in trying out different curriculum styles, exploring different tutoring options until we find the right solution for each child to succeed. In the process, we discover that they are not broken, they are gifted, and it is the freedom of the homeschool environment that lets them fly. No homeschool child is ever left behind. The reality is that greater government regulation will lead to less opportunity for individual optimization within homeschooling. Therefore, I urge you to vote no on HF 1269, or at least pass an amendment that strikes lines 3.7 to 3.9. Thank you very much for your time and your consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. We'll now move to member discussion. We'll start with Representative Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will allow the author to respond to other comments, but I just did want to uplift various parts of the bill that I think are really important to our students in Minnesota and students across the board. I just want to have the members reflect back to the state demographer's report that we had a couple weeks ago. Minnesota student body is changing, and we have to change along with it. So really grateful to the folks at MDE and the governor for putting forward this proposal to address some of the mascot issues, and also really uplifting ethnic studies. As someone who represents St. Paul, I'm really proud of our school district for making ethnic studies one of our graduation requirements. And so I just want to thank the department for uplifting that. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Lee. We'll go next to Representative Bakeberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is that? So thank you, Representative Pryor. This bill is truly extensive, and I think it's 105 pages. And there are some pieces that are valuable, but simply this bill is heavy on mandates and leaves little room for innovation and local control. This bill empowers people farthest from the classroom. Let that sink in. Farthest from the classroom That includes all of us sitting at the table to make decisions about what happens. That includes the Department of Education. We are farthest from the classroom. We should be empowering our local school districts, our locally elected school board, and most importantly, our educators and parents to make the decisions that are best for their children. As talked about, this bill ignores the science of reading, removes accountability from teacher prep programs at a time that 51% of our students are meeting the MCA reading requirement. 49% of our students are not meeting grade level reading standards, and we're going to remove that? That is insane. In my professional opinion, this bill shows a complete lack of respect for what educators, parents, and those with a different point of view actually want. Educators and parents do not want to fund bureaucracy. We want to fund innovative programs that let our students fly and find their potential, like the ALC programs that we've talked about. Educators and parents do not want mandates. We want flexibility to serve our students. Oftentimes, these mandates make 0 sense to those of us that actually do the job. Representative Hill, I'm sure there are pieces you would agree with that. Educators and parents do not want division. We want to talk about our past, but we don't want division. Frankly, I talked to an educator on Friday who is sick and tired of the division. What they actually said is, I want to teach math. The homeschool requirement, I would be curious who's asking for this, because I can tell you superintendents are not wanting this. I've talked to my superintendents. They don't want this requirement. MDE continues, and I've spoken very frankly to MDE, but the Department of Education continues to put educators in a lose-lose situation over and over. To the homeschool families that are here, please remember that this is not being pushed by your local superintendent. It's not being pushed by the teachers who love kids and want to serve kids. This is being pushed by a small few at the Department of Education. And frankly, educators are leaving. I'm almost done.
Thank you.
Educators are leaving because of the division. We as a committee have a responsibility to improve educational opportunities for our kids. We should be asking questions, why are kids leaving our schools? That's what I ask at my building. If a kid leaves, I ask them why they leave. And if there's an issue we have to fix, we fix it. That's the question that should be asked. We trust parents to make the educational decisions best for their children. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative. We'll move next to Representative Keeler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Pryor, I actually have a question for NDE. I don't know if Adosh or somebody is here. $44.5 through 4417. I just have a clarifying question around it. So it's striking out Indian education liaisons and adding Indian education program coordinators. Does that mean that we're completely dissolving of liaisons in our district and we're now moving them to a title of coordinator?
Mr. Chair and Representative Keeler, no, that's not the case. Under the American Indian Education Aid that these schools receive, they are actually required to have an American Indian Education Program Coordinator, which does fulfill many of the duties of the liaison, but it's a specific requirement for these schools that we have just heard it was not clear that they need to have a designated community coordinator for these programs. A liaison who exists in the schools could fulfill those duties so long as they are it is a focused part of their work and not just a title.
Wonderful. Follow-up?
Okay, yep, follow up,
Keeler?
Mr. Chair. So the only suggestion I would add in this space, and you know, I've said it here before, I was an Indian education liaison for 12 years. It was my favorite job. And the one thing that we've seen in transportation is that there is an American Indian hiring preference, because I think it is absolutely paramount that individuals who are working with Indigenous students are also identifying as Indigenous as well. It's one of the things that we continue to talk about, that we see representation in the individuals that are in our schools. So the only suggestion I would maybe add or take back is that as we're hiring these positions that are housed under Indian education, because I know in my district, the coordinators and the upper level individuals who are making decisions about our students are not Native. And they're making decisions that are not culturally inclusive or infused, and it's actually breaking down what I think the whole system wants to do. So thank you for clarifying for me, because it kind of made me nervous for a minute, but I would add, if we're gonna add that, if there's a way that we can make sure that we have some sort of preference. I know it can't be a requirement, but some sort of Native American hiring preference on it. And then I have other things that we'll talk about in other bills down the road, but also highlighting the fact that the lunch component is really important to me. We've talked about it in many spaces. Feeding our communities, if our kids don't have food, they just can't be the very best that they can be. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Keeler. If there's no objection, and I'd like to expand our meeting by about 5 minutes. We have two more speakers on the list. Representative Frazier quickly, and followed up by Representative Bennett, and then some closing remarks. Okay,
I'll be
sorry.
quick.
Go ahead, Representative Ueki.
Oh, no, just.
Mr. Chair, excuse, I'm sorry for interrupting. There is a caucus 4:30 deadline, so if we could.
Yeah, about 1 minute each,
Caucus
please,
is at
if possible.
4:45.
We're interrupting.
About 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Madam Chair, for bringing this bill forward. I know that it's the duty of the chair to bring the governor's policy bill forward. We have to remember that we're another part of the body, and a lot of the work we're going to do here together is bills that our members bring forward, and the governor's policy bill is one thing that we look at. I just want to lift up the provisions in there that actually support educators. I have a lot of educators in my family, and I hear, number one, from them and their friends that the reason why they're leaving is actually because they're not feeling supported. And this bill has a lot of supports in there for teachers. I got a little confused when we were talking about literacy. We're going to have the Ed Finance bill through that is really supportive of the science of reading. I don't believe we're taking literacy out of our classrooms. I just want to make sure everybody understood that. And I wanted to thank you and lift up the work around that Ms. Harper mentioned in her testimony, as well as the non-exclusionary discipline pieces that our teachers have also been asking for. So look forward to the work this committee is going to do and Ed Finance is going to do. And thank you, Mr. Chair, for the leeway.
Thank you, Representative. Next to Representative Frazier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Pryor, for bringing this bill. I just want to speak to the ethnic studies strands piece. I think those are important. We've got an increasingly diverse student body that we're seeing on a daily basis, yearly basis in our state. And I think I have 3 daughters that have gone through K-12 here. Well, 2 are in the process of finishing up. And there hasn't been a year that hasn't gone by when they haven't said to me, Daddy, why don't I see more about myself in these books? Why don't I see someone that looks like me in front of the classroom? Why don't we have a focus on what it's like to be me? And so I'm happy we finally getting to a point where we're going to infuse that within the curriculum, because it's important that we represent and encourage what the future of our state is going to look like. Whether we like it or not, this will be the future of our state. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And first, I'd like to say I would have hoped this bill would have had like an entire committee, because it's a huge bill, and we've obviously run out of time. But I'll just make comments. Representative Bakeford, thank you. He actually summed up a lot of mine. So I'm just going to make one comment about the component that is targeting our homeschool students. We have 27,000 homeschool students in our state. We have 850,000 public school students. Why are we targeting the spec that's not even a problem when we have a log in our own eyes where half of our students are not proficient in reading and less than half in math? So I would hope that MDE and our governor would take those lines out. We do not need to target our homeschool students. They're doing great. Let's target where we need to make the best efforts to give our students the best education that we can. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative. And we'll go for closing remarks. Representative Pryor.
Thank you, Vice Chair, Acting Chair Hill. Appreciate your efficiency in moving through this meeting with the comments that we have available. This is a bill that's been seen before. It's been basically, many of it has been passed in previous years with a few additions along the way. It's been discussed and vetted and is a priority of I know, coming from our department, but also coming from the governor and the lieutenant governor of Minnesota, just reelected. So we know that these are the priorities of voters across the state, as reflected in who they chose to lead the state. And so it's a bill that I'm honored to carry, but it's also a bill that we'll be working forward with because no group has all the answers, and that's why it's being laid over, and which it would have been no matter what. But it's also laid over because we hear the bill, we take it from the governor's office and the presentation of it, and now we, with our own election certificates representing our communities, look at it and see how what we think improves it. There will be profound differences even at the end, and we can anticipate those. But what we're heading towards is not just this bill, but we'll be heading towards a package of bills that we'll be bringing forward to the floor. Bills that will be addressing literacy, bills that will be addressing teacher retention and teacher recruitment, bills that will, in addition to this, be addressing the unacceptable disparities we have in this state that we cannot continue with and that we have to take seriously. So I know that we have a good start. We have a lot of material to work with, very expansive, and we appreciate that because, that's what we need. We don't need quick, easy solutions. We don't need sound bites. We need good work and we need good policy, and that is the purpose of this committee. So another day in ed policy. Thank you, Acting Chair Hill, for leading us through this process.
Thank you, Representative Pryor. And with that, she renews her motion, and this bill is laid over.